is Elizabeth Miranda. I was born on December 29, 1990. I was raised in South Central Los Angeles, where the traffic of the 110 freeway, helicopters, and police sirens were popular noises throughout the day and night. Spanish was the only language spoken in my household. My parents, who migrated from Mexico in the 1980s, spoke little pieces of broken English to me and my sister, but we learned mostly from the small box where we could watch cartoons in English. Religiously, I watched Sesame Street, Between the Lions, and Reading Rainbow. Pretty soon, my sister and I began to speak English, having our own language that our parents couldn't understand. Because my parents were immigrants, they worked hard to Americanize us so that we could assimilate to the Western culture around us. My mother always emphasized the importance of education to move up in society. She gave us daily lectures on our walks to school about becoming something in this country. In Spanish, she would sternly say, "Yo no me enfrenté a los peligros de la frontera para que ustedes no hagan nada con sus vidas. Pónganse las pilas." Growing up, my family's socioeconomic status didn't change much. As a teenager, I dealt with an identity crisis, trying to fit in with my peers, and I began to lose my Mexican identity. The loss wasn't apparent at first. In middle school, I loved to read in my English and history classes. If I was learning about wars, the American writers, or being introduced to Shakespeare, I learned it, no questions asked. This got boring once I got to high school. It was the same information again, and the events that I did want to learn about, like the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, and issues about immigration were always cut short, so I got bored and reading wasn't as enticing as before. At home, I tried and have a conversation with my mother, and I would need her help translating what I was trying to say in Spanish. I realized I had lost my language. All hopes of reconnecting with my culture and language were not lost, though. In 10th grade, I took a Spanish class. I learned about the history of Mexico, the art of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, Dia de los Muertos, and more Mexican food. I got to collaborate with other students who spoke Spanish better than I did. Being fluent in my first language was so important to me because it tied me to my family in the Mexico I never knew. Now, as an adult, my identity and culture has become more than just being Mexican American. My interests such as swimming and spending time with pets are a huge part of who I am. These interests, along with my education, have brought a rich experience of ideas into my life, and a realization that it wasn't my fault that I lost my first language. The lack of representation of me and others in the school curriculum was the issue. As a future English teacher, I fully intend on including all my students in my content area. Teaching students about Columbus and European origins has nothing to say about who they are as a people. Teaching them about relatable events that affect them in the present does. My culture has shaped my educational philosophy to keep in mind that sharing my own experiences can be part of my instruction that will help me work well with my students. I will focus on the interests and needs of my students so that they can flourish in my classroom. I will use a progressivism approach because of the diversity of students presented in schools. I aim to have a learner-centered classroom where my students are the ones facilitating conversations and exchanging information with their peers and myself. I will encourage my students to engage in critical thinking, to ask questions, and to put their voices in the classroom. Professionally, I want to be able to show other teachers how the progressivist approach works and why it can help when they share knowledge rather than just present it. In the classroom, teachers should provide content and materials for their students based on who they are and what they like. I know it will take some time to become culturally competent because of the amount of diversity in schools, but I believe some strategies that can be implemented to get to know students are valuing their diversity and engaging in activities where students can talk and write about their cultural background, languages, traditions, and values, because this creates an environment where everyone can feel respected and comfortable about who they are. To serve my students well, I will work on constructing a culture-responsive curriculum and student-centered instruction to have engaged student learning. In Los Angeles, diversity is everywhere, and as someone who has been constantly exposed to different parts of the city and different people, I continuously minimize my bias by learning about the ways languages should be approached when speaking to those who are different than me, learning about different backgrounds, and pronouncing names correctly. I will always make sure that when my future students and their families interact with me, that they are comfortable. I do not feel a fault when there is an issue in the classroom. I will make sure that my language and tone never come off as condescending when communicating with students and their families. If ever there is a negative impact affecting the learning environment, I want to give students and myself the space to talk about what is happening, to help us work through what everyone can do to create a positive learning environment. I will embrace multicultural education in my content area of English and culturally responsive teaching in my instructional practice by providing my future students with content that provides multiple perspectives and diverse literature that they can read, write, and speak about in collaboration with the rest of their peers. I will also provide my students with content they feel represent them so that they can feel confident and engaged about sharing their ideas and cultures in the learning environment.